They called her the calm after the storm. That's what people whispered anyway, behind the heavy doors of Whitestone Manor, after the scandal that nearly devoured the last heir of the Whitmore fortune. He was young, still too kind for this old money world. They had watched him stagger through lawsuits, betrayals, distant relatives, circling like vultures. And then she appeared, the fiancée. Beautiful, soft-spoken, all compassion and gentle smiles. A saviour wrapped in silk. The household staff, the invisible ones who polished the silver and swept up the crumbs no one saw, they watched too. They were the first to see the tiny cracks. Not in her hair or her gowns, those were perfect, but in the way she'd hold her glass at dinner, fingers pale against crystal, eyes narrowed just a fraction when no one important was looking. At first it was just a rumour, a young maid carrying gossip on her apron strings. She's so kind in front of him, but have you seen the way she looks at us? They laughed it off. What could one girl's side-eye mean in a house like this? But then came the water. It started with the gardener's boy, a shy, jumpy boy who brought flowers to her door every morning because she liked fresh lilies at breakfast. He showed up at the back door one night, his shirt soaked, hair dripping like he'd been caught in a storm indoors. "You fall in the fountain?" the butler asked, half joking. The boy flinched so hard he nearly dropped the vase in his arms. "No, sir, just she didn't want the water anymore." He never said more, no one did, because every servant here had a family to feed. They all knew what would happen if they spoke up. One word against the fiancé, and your name would vanish from the payroll like it was never there at all. Your mother, your brother, the children who counted on the envelope that came every Thursday, gone, just like that. And so they stayed quiet. They wiped the floors dry when she changed her mind halfway through a drink and hurled the rest in someone's face. They pressed cold cloths to red cheeks, washed blouses stained with mineral water and spit. Outside, the world still saw her as the blessing he never deserved. Inside, the walls of Whitestone Manor held secrets that dripped, one glass at a time, onto the stone floors, into the seams of the house where no one with power ever looked. But sometimes, secrets can only drown for so long. And one night, when the master of the house opened the wrong door at the wrong time, the water and the lies would finally break through. It happened during one of those evenings that looked beautiful on the outside. The long dining table glowed with soft candlelight. The silverware gleamed, untouched. Outside the tall windows, the garden lights flickered gently like fireflies, and at the head of the table sat the heir, quiet, thoughtful, sipping his wine with the woman he believed would become his wife. She laughed at something he said, that soft, practiced laugh that always seemed to float just right above the music. The guests were charmed, they always were, but at the far end of the room, behind the curtains, a maid stood silently. Eliza. She had been called to refill the water glasses. It should have been a simple task. The fiancée lifted her crystal goblet, swirled the water lazily, and set it down again with a clink, not on the coaster but on the edge of the table, tilted. Eliza noticed. Quietly she stepped forward and fixed it. No words, just instinct, the kind of care you learn when you're invisible. The fiancée turned slowly. Her smile stayed, but her eyes changed, cold and hollow like a pond before a storm. She picked up the glass again, just a third full now. She stared at it for a long, strange moment, as if the water had done something to offend her, and then, with a flick of her wrist, she threw the rest. It hit Eliza square in the face. The guests didn't see it. They were too busy laughing at a joke the heir had just told. But the splash echoed, soft but sharp, like something sacred breaking. Eliza froze. Her skin stung, not from the water, it wasn't hot, it wasn't cold, but from the humiliation. The kind that soaks through your bones even when no one is watching. Her hands shook, but she kept her eyes down, biting her lips so hard she tasted blood. The fiancée didn't say a word. She simply looked away, back to her soup, as if nothing had happened. "And Eliza?" she whispered. "Excuse me," turned around and walked back toward the kitchen, leaving a trail of quiet drips on the marble floor. No one followed, but in the hallway, just beyond the arch, the heir had paused. He had seen a blur. Eliza's soaked hair, the empty glass, the flicker of something cruel in the woman beside him. He didn't say anything, not yet, but that silence, that tightness in his chest, it would follow him, because deep down, even if he didn't want to believe it, something in him had just cracked. And the sound of that splash would come back, again and again, until he could no longer ignore what it really meant. In the kitchen, the warmth of the stoves could not chase the chill from Eliza's skin. She stood near the sink, water dripping from her hair onto the stone floor, mixing with the dishwater like something filthy that wouldn't wash away. She didn't cry, or maybe she did. It was hard to tell with her face already wet. Around her, the other servants busied themselves with plates and cutlery, their eyes flicking to her, then darting away again. No one spoke, no one dared. No, except old Mrs. Greaves, the head housekeeper, bent and grey, hands rough from years of scrubbing marble no one thanked her for. She moved beside Eliza, pressing a small warm towel into her hands. "Sit, child, just for a minute." But Eliza shook her head. "I'm fine, Ma'am," she whispered, though her lip was still bleeding from where she'd bitten it. Mrs. Greaves' eyes softened, tired eyes, the kind that had seen too much and learned when to keep it locked behind her teeth. But tonight she couldn't hold it all in. "She's clever, that one. Sweet as sugar in the ballroom, vinegar in the shadows," she murmured, low enough that only Eliza could hear. "I didn't see anything," Eliza said quickly. Her voice trembled, not from the cold. "You mustn't say such things. If she finds out—" Mrs. Greaves glanced around the dim kitchen, her gaze brushing over the back door, where the rain still tapped on the glass. "When I was your age, I thought silence would protect me too." She touched Eliza's cheek, wiping away a stray drop of water. "But secrets rot the walls from the inside out, and the truth, well, child, the truth always leaks through, even if it's only a drip at first." Eliza's shoulders stiffened. Behind them, the scullery boy watched. He was just 12, small, with wide eyes that never looked up when the mistress passed by. But tonight he saw the dark stain on Eliza's uniform, the way her hands clutched the towel as if it was her only shield. Upstairs, the heir sat alone in his study. The fire flickered, its light too soft to burn the questions out of his mind. He thought of her gentle laughter, her kind words, and then he remembered the way Eliza flinched, her eyes darting to the floor as she passed him. His fiancée's voice echoed in his head, that perfect voice, so sweet it stuck to the walls. Why do you trust them? They gossip, they lie, they'd say anything to tear us apart. But something inside him, the same part that once survived betrayal after betrayal, refused to hush. And downstairs, in the hush of the kitchen, a single drop of water fell from Eliza's sleeve onto the flagstone. A tiny splash, a promise that one day the flood would come. It was just past midnight when the house fell silent, that restless silence of old estates where even the walls hold their breath. Upstairs, the air lay awake, staring at the ceiling as rain tapped softly on the windows. Every drop sounded like the echo of something he hadn't wanted to hear. His fiancée had kissed his forehead before she left the study, sweet, gentle, the perfect balm for a man who'd been betrayed too many times to count. "You shouldn't listen to the help, love. They spin tales when they're bored." He almost believed her. He wanted to. But the memory of Eliza's wet hair, the tremble in her lip, wouldn't dissolve no matter how he turned it in his mind. Downstairs, in the dim hallway near the staff quarters, Eliza stood at the wash basin. She scrubbed at her blouse with shaking hands, water and soap mixing with the faint scent of rose petals she couldn't wash out. It didn't matter how hard she scrubbed, the shame clung like a bruise. Behind her, the door creaked open. It was the new boy, Thomas, barely 17, too young to know when to keep his eyes down. "Miss Eliza," he whispered, shifting from foot to foot. I saw her do it, the glass." Eliza flinched, her hands freezing in the basin. "Hush," she hissed, glancing over her shoulder. The walls had ears in Whitestone Manor. Didn't the boy know that yet? You say that out loud and you'll be on the street by dawn. But Thomas just stared at her wide-eyed. He held up his palm. In it lay a shard of crystal, clear as ice, its edges sharp. "I found it by the stair rail, still wet. She threw it at you, didn't she?" Eliza's throat went dry. "Don't keep that," she begged, her voice hoarse. "Throw it away, bury it, if she finds out." But upstairs, that same shard, that same impossible detail, was flickering in the heir's mind too. He had come down the hall, later than he should have, footsteps soft over the marble. And there, by the stair rail, a thin trail of water and a gleam of broken crystal catching the moonlight like a wink. Why would a glass be there? Why was Eliza always the one left drenched and silent? His fiancée's voice rang in his head. You know I would never hurt them. I love this household as my own. But now that voice seemed thinner, transparent, like the glass she claimed she never broke. In the servants' corridor, Mrs. Greaves pressed a small bundle of dry clothes into Eliza's arms. You mustn't let them see you shiver, dear. But remember, when they speak kindness to your face and cruelty behind closed doors, it's the water that shows who they truly are. Eliza lowered her eyes, her lips parting to protest. But the old woman was right. And in her pocket, the broken shard Thomas had given her weighed more than 1,000 promises. Upstairs, the air ran a hand over his tired face, staring at the spot where the crystal had caught the moonlight. He wanted so desperately to believe he was loved. But sometimes, all it takes is one crack in the glass, and you can't help but see what's been there all along. The next morning, the man awoke to the scent of fresh bread and the hush of rain against the windows. But under that soft hush, a different kind of storm was building. Quiet, invisible, coiled around every nervous glance in the hallway. Eliza moved through the kitchen like a ghost, polite, efficient, her eyes never rising when the fiancé's footsteps echoed across the marble. The bruise on her cheekbone, faint but real, glowed beneath the cold light from the windows. Near the back pantry, Thomas stood pressed against the wall, that shard of crystal still hidden deep in his pocket. He shouldn't have kept it. He knew that now. But some part of him, the part that had watched his mother scrub floors for men who never looked her in the eye, couldn't let it go. Thomas, a voice hissed. He jumped. Mrs. Greaves pulled him into the narrow corridor by the wine cellar. The old woman's eyes were fierce, sharper than the knives she kept spotless for the kitchen. What are you doing, boy? You think you're brave, carrying that thing around? Someone has to tell him, Thomas whispered, his hands shaking so badly the shard nearly slipped. If he knew what she really is. And you think he'll thank you? Her voice cracked, part anger, part fear. Do you know what happens to people who pry where they shouldn't? Your father's job gone, your sister's medicine gone. They'll gut you, lad, and not with a knife, with a signature on a letter that says, you're dismissed. Thomas swallowed. He could feel the shape of the broken glass in his palm, cold and accusing. Upstairs, the air paced the library. The windows were cracked open to the rain, letting the damp air in, as if that would wash the confusion out of him. He had trusted her. He wanted to trust her still. After all the vultures, the lawsuits, the relatives who tried to gut him for a taste of his father's wealth, she had been his sanctuary. His reason to believe kindness was still real. But now, he remembered the look in Eliza's eyes when the water hit her face. Not anger, just this hollow ache, this bone-deep shame she never deserved. Why didn't she flinch when he asked? Why do they all go silent when she passes by? Questions, each one sharp as that missing shard of glass. Back in the corridor, Thomas leaned closer to Mrs. Greaves, voice trembling. He should know, he deserves to know. The old woman's eyes softened. For a heartbeat, she almost looked proud. But then her shoulders dropped. Her voice sank to a whisper. If you speak up, lad, you better not do it alone. The truth is heavier than you think, and it always collects its price. Just then, a shadow darkened the far end of the corridor. It was the fiancée's maid, her eyes glittering like a cat in the dark. What's this? She said sweetly. Chatting where you shouldn't be? Should I tell Miss about your little secrets? Thomas felt the blood drain from his face. In his pocket, the shard of crystal cut into his palm, sharp enough to remind him. One wrong word, and everything he loved could disappear like mist in this cold, silent house. The rain that evening fell harder than ever, steady and relentless, drumming on the vast glass windows of Whitestone Manor. Inside, the corridors felt colder than the garden outside. Eliza stood in the linen room, folding tablecloths that smelled faintly of lavender and bleach. Her fingers moved automatically, but her ears strained for every creak of the old floorboards. She knew they watched her, she could feel it. The way the fiancé's personal maid lingered in the hallway, lips curled in that half-smile that meant, try me. She thought of Thomas. The poor boy had barely spoken all day, eyes down, sleeves pulled low over the small cut on his palm where the glass shard had bitten him. Somewhere deep down, Eliza wished she had taken it from him, hidden it far away, but she hadn't. And now they all carried this fragile shard of truth like a blade pressed to their own throats. Upstairs, in the study that smelled of old books and stale whiskey, the heir stared at the fireplace as if the flames could answer him. A single crystal glass, untouched, sat on the desk beside him. He traced the rim with his thumb, the memory of that broken piece by the stair rail burning like a brand on the inside of his skull. He had trusted her more than anyone. After his father's death, when lawyers circled like wolves and distant cousins made claims on his fortune, she had been his anchor. Her kindness had been his shield. But now, every laugh, every gentle word felt like poison dripping sweetly into a wound. He picked up the phone. "Call the security room, I want the hallway tapes. Last night and the night before." The guard's voice on the other end stammered. "Sir, some of the cameras were under repair. Orders from Miss." He said nothing. He simply hung up, his hand shaking just once before he steadied it on the oak desk. Meanwhile, Thomas sat on the servants' bench behind the kitchens. His uniform was damp at the hem. He'd been out in the courtyard pretending to check the coal shed, trying to catch a breath that didn't taste like fear. He didn't notice the shadow until it loomed over him. The fiancé's maid, smile sharp as vinegar. "You've been busy, haven't you, boy?" she purred, her nails tapping the wooden bench beside his arm. "Carrying tales, poking your nose where it doesn't belong." Thomas shook his head so fast he nearly fell sideways. "No, Mum, I swear, I didn't say." She leaned close. "If you want to keep your job, keep your mouth shut. Or better yet, pack your bag and run home to your sick mother. Maybe she'd like a letter saying her son's a liar who steals silver." His lips parted, but the words caught. A cold dread climbed his spine. Because in a place like this, one rumour was enough to ruin an entire family. He wanted to scream, to stand up and run to the heir's office, throw the crystal shard on his desk and shout, "She's not who you think!" But fear weighs more than truth, and tonight that fear wrapped around his throat like a rope. Back in the study, the heir held the glass up to the light, the facets throwing soft prisms onto the ceiling. A part of him still wanted to believe she was good, the sweet fiancée who had saved him from ruin. But as the thunder rolled above the manor, another part of him knew. Sometimes a storm doesn't just wash things clean, it washes them away. And some secrets were never meant to stay buried, not even at the cost of a life lived in fear. The next day dawned grey and heavy. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but inside Whitestone Manor, it felt like thunder was still trapped between the walls. Eliza woke early, too early, her bones aching from another night spent listening for footsteps in the dark. She crept down the hallway, her shoes soft on the cold stone. Something felt wrong, a silence too deep, too still. When she passed the back stairwell, she paused. Thomas's bed was empty. The thin blanket folded, the pillow untouched. His shoes, soaked from the day before, were gone. A knot twisted in her chest. In the kitchen, Mrs. Greaves stood by the back door, her apron stained with flour and grief. "Mrs. Greaves!" Eliza whispered, her voice cracking. "Where is he? Have you seen Thomas?" The old woman didn't answer at first. She just kept kneading bread that no one would eat, her hands trembling over the dough. "Gone," she said finally, so low Eliza had to lean in. "Packed off before dawn, no warning, no pay, just gone." "But why? He didn't—" Eliza's throat closed around the lie. Of course she knew why. Secrets don't vanish on their own, they get buried or buried alive. Upstairs in the grand breakfast room, the heir stared at his plate as if he'd forgotten how to eat. His fiancée sat across from him, pouring tea with that same perfect calm that had once soothed every raw edge in him. "You're quiet today, love," she said sweetly, brushing invisible crumbs from the lace cloth. "Is something on your mind?" He almost said it then. "Where is Thomas?" But the words caught. He saw the slight tightening around her eyes, the way her smile froze for half a breath when she noticed the question forming on his tongue. Instead, he swallowed it, replacing suspicion with the bitter taste of doubt. "Nothing," he lied, staring at the tea swirling in his cup. When she left the table, he stayed behind. His hand hovered over her half-finished glass of water, droplets still clinging to the rim. A sudden memory flickered. Thomas, wide-eyed, his sleeves wet. Eliza flinching as water streamed down her face. He picked up the glass, turned it in his fingers. A hairline crack, almost invisible, caught the light. A servant entered, startled to see him holding it so carefully. "Who cleared the hall last night?" he asked. His voice was soft but iron underneath. The boy stammered. "It was Thomas, sir. He said he'd wipe the railing clean, but he's gone now." "Gone?" The word landed like thunder. "Yes, sir. The maid said Miss sent him home. Something about him needing rest, but he didn't say goodbye." Downstairs, Eliza found a scrap of paper tucked under Thomas's mattress. Just one line in his cramped, shaky hand. "I kept it safe. If I don't come back, it's yours now." And in her apron pocket, the shard of crystal, the piece of truth that weighed more than gold, pressed into her skin like a warning. That night, the heir stood by the window in his study, rain tapping faintly against the glass. He could feel it now, that everything he thought he knew was cracking, hairline by hairline. Somewhere in this house, the truth waited, splintered, wet, impossible to drown. And no matter how hard someone tried to bury it, it was ready to cut its way to the light. The next morning, Whitestone Manor felt like it was holding its breath. Rain had given way to a thin, cold mist that clung to the windows like a memory no one wanted to wipe away. Eliza moved through the hallway with her head down, her apron pocket heavy with the shard Thomas had left behind, the tiny piece of truth he'd paid for in silence. Mrs. Greaves cornered her near the linen closet, her voice a rough whisper. "He'll know soon enough," she said. Her eyes darted toward the grand staircase, where the fiancé's laughter drifted like perfume, sweet but cloying. "He wants to know," Eliza said. Her hands trembled as she clutched the scrap of paper Thomas had hidden. "But what if he doesn't believe it when he sees?" The old woman's mouth twisted into a sad smile. "Sometimes the truth ain't what breaks a man. It's knowing he ignored it for so long." Upstairs, the heir stood at the threshold of the drawing room. Inside, his fiancée's back was to him, her voice soft and honeyed as she spoke into the phone. Too soft for him to hear the words, but just sharp enough to feel the barbs. She turned when she saw his reflection in the tall mirror. Her expression flickered, just for an instant, before the sweetness returned. "Love, you startled me," she said, setting the receiver down with an elegant clink. He stepped inside, his shoes sinking into the plush carpet that had once made this house feel like a sanctuary. Now it felt like a trap laid in silk. "Where's Thomas?" His voice cracked the air like distant thunder. She blinked, so perfectly innocent. "Who?" He didn't answer, just watched her face. Watched her blink again. Watched her lips part, as if searching for a script she hadn't written yet. "The boy," he said, his tone low but unyielding. "You sent him away in the middle of the night. Why?" She laughed, a soft, breathy thing that made the back of his neck prickle. "Darling, you're tired. He was young, weak. I sent him home. He was no use to us. These servants gossip too much, you know that? They spin lies to make themselves feel important." She stepped closer, her hand brushing his sleeve like a snake winding up an arm. "You trust me, don't you?" In that moment, for one heartbeat, he wanted to say yes, to drown in the lie because it was warmer than the cold truth knocking on the walls of his mind. But behind her shoulder, the glint of something on the small side table caught his eye. A half-finished glass of water, a faint crack along its rim, a tiny hairline fracture, just like the one Thomas had shown Eliza, just like the one by the stair rail. He pictured the boy's empty bed, the bruise on Eliza's cheek, the way the other servants shrank when she walked past. "I trust what I see," he said finally, pulling back from her touch. Her eyes narrowed, just a flicker, but enough to show the steel behind the silk. "And what do you think you see?" Before he could answer, a soft knock broke the tension. Mrs. Greaves stood in the doorway, her hands wringing her apron. "Forgive me, sir," she said, her voice dry as dust, but her eyes looked onto his like an unspoken plea. "There's something you might want to look at downstairs." For the first time he saw it, the trembling edge in the old woman's shoulders, the truth brimming just behind her fear. He glanced at his fiancée. The smile on her lips never reached her eyes. Down the hallway, Eliza waited in the shadows, clutching the shard of crystal so tightly it dug into her palm. The last sliver of Thomas's courage pressed into her skin like a promise. One secret never stays buried forever. They gathered in the smallest room of Whitestone Manor, the old service pantry with cracked tile floors and cabinets that still smelled faintly of lemon oil and damp secrets. Eliza stood near the far wall, her fingers wrapped tight around the shard Thomas had left behind. Mrs. Greaves hovered beside her, shoulders square for once, as if her old bones had remembered what it felt like to stand tall. The heir entered last, the hush of his footsteps heavier than thunder. He looked at them, at the faces that had learned to bow and nod and keep their eyes down. And for the first time, they didn't look away. "Show me," he said, voice low but clear. Mrs. Greaves stepped forward, her hands trembling as she reached into her apron pocket. She pulled out a small, crumpled cloth, and inside it the matching shard. 2 broken edges, splintered but fitting together like a wound that refused to heal. "It was Thomas," she said softly. "He kept this hidden when they tried to hush him. He knew." Her voice cracked. The old woman who had mopped these floors since before the heir was born wiped at her eyes with the corner of her sleeve. He knew what she was. Eliza stepped closer. Her voice barely rose above a whisper, but in that tiny pantry, every word hit like a stone dropped into water. "She says she loves this house, that she cares for us. But she's been using us like rags. When no one sees, she throws the water in our faces, makes us beg just to keep our jobs. Thomas, he saw too much. He's gone now, but he didn't want to be the last." The heir's eyes flicked to the shards in her hands, the crystal edges catching the single bare bulb overhead. They glowed like tiny knives. Behind him, in the doorway, the fiancé appeared, perfect as always, not a hair out of place. "What is this circus?" she asked sweetly, her smile pressed tight. "You listen to their lies now? The servants, after everything I've done for you?" He didn't answer. He only reached out, palm up, and Eliza placed the shard into his hand, cold and slick with her sweat. He turned it in his fingers, remembering every crack he'd ignored. The hallway tapes under repair. The bruises, no one explained, Thomas's empty bed. "You said you trusted me," she whispered, voice low and venomous now, only for him. "I did." His answer was quiet. No shouting, no grand speeches. Just the final breath of something breaking that should have broken long ago. The fiancée stepped forward, her eyes sharp enough to cut glass themselves. "You think they care about you?" she hissed, waving a manicured hand at the servants pressed against the pantry walls. "They'll always hate you. They'd sell your secrets for pennies if they could. They're nothing, just water under your feet." She reached for the heir's hand as if to pluck the shard from his palm. But he pulled back, the motion calm but final, and in that moment, the tiniest sound broke the air. A half-finished glass of water, perched on the pantry shelf behind her, trembled, then slipped. It hit the floor between them with a shatter so soft it sounded like rain. No one spoke, no one moved, but in the echo of that broken glass, every mask fell. He turned to Eliza, not with pity, but with something almost like apology. And to Mrs. Greaves, the woman who had given her whole life to keeping these walls clean of everything but truth. "I'm sorry," he said, and it was the only thing left that felt honest in this old house. Outside, the mist pressed against the windows. Inside, a single drip of water slid across the cracked tile, the final thread unravelling the lie. They made her leave before dusk. No shouting, no final tantrum thrown against the ancient walls. She knew when she'd lost. The fiancée with her perfect hair, her silk scarf draped over her shoulders like a dying snake. Her footsteps echoed down the marble hall, each one softer than the last, but none of the staff dared to breathe until the heavy door slammed shut behind her. And then, like the first crack of thunder after a long silence, the whispers began to fade, replaced by something else. Not relief, not yet, but the possibility of it. In the kitchen, Eliza stood with Mrs. Greaves, the two of them watching the rain slip down the windows in silver threads. She still had the shard in her apron pocket. She wondered if she should bury it in the garden, let the soil have the final word. But Mrs. Greaves touched her shoulder. "Keep it," she said, her voice soft but fierce. "A piece of what they thought they could hide. Let it remind you, no lie stays hidden forever." Upstairs, the heir sat alone in the small morning room that had once been her favourite. Her perfume still clung to the cushions. The empty teacup sat where she'd left it, a smear of lipstick marking the rim. A ghost of sweetness that had never been real. He thought of the water, the way it had always been just water to him. He never saw the fear that dripped down a young maid's hair. The flinch behind the polite curtsy he had chosen not to see, and that was his greatest shame. When Eliza entered, she paused at the doorway, waiting for him to acknowledge her. He did, with a small nod that said more than any apology. He poured a glass of water himself this time. No servants to do it for him. No polished crystal goblet that cut when it broke, just an ordinary glass. He set it gently in front of her. "No more thrown water," he said, voice rough around the edges. "Not in this house, not ever again." Eliza didn't answer with words. She didn't need to. The truth had been spoken, not shouted. The masks were gone, the wounds laid bare. Outside, the rain finally eased, thinning to a quiet drizzle that seemed to rinse the garden stones clean. In a house where once a glass of water could drown a soul in shame, now it sat untouched. A promise that from this day forward, there would be no more secrets left to rot in the dark. And if there were, someone would speak, someone would remember, because sometimes it takes just one broken glass, and one voice refusing to stay silent, to remind the powerful that kindness is not something to be poured out and thrown away. Personal reflection and lesson. Sometimes the smallest cruelties, like a glass of water thrown in secret, reveal the biggest lies. This story reminds me, true kindness never humiliates in the dark while smiling in the light. No matter how much fear tries to bury the truth, it always finds a crack to break through. So protect the quiet voices. One broken glass is enough to remind us. Some respect can't be poured out and thrown away. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. If this story touched you, even just a little, I hope you'll carry its quiet lesson with you. There will always be more stories waiting here for you, whenever you need them. Take care, and see you next time.